The year is 1878. The Civil War is a ghost that still haunts the land, and out in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Dakota Territory. A man can ride for days without seeing another soul. This is a story forged in that silence, a story of blood dust and an impossible choice. It's about a man running from his past who stumbled upon a woman with no future. He saved her life with medicine and grit, but in the world of the Lakota, such a debt is never simply repaid. It must be bound spirit to spirit for all time. This isn't a tall tale told around a campfire. This is the story of Crew Ellington and how saving a life cost him his freedom only to show him what it truly meant to be free. The wind in the Black Hills carried secrets. It whispered through the ponderosa pines and moaned across the granite faces of the mountains, a lonely sound for a lonely man. Crew Ellington was well acquainted with lonely. For 3 years since leaving the ravaged fields of Georgia, he'd sought it out, embraced it like a bitter tonic. The war had taken everything from him, his family, his farm, his faith in his fellow man. All he had left were the calluses on his hands, a colt peacemaker strapped to his hip, and a horse named Rebel, who was a better listener than any man he'd ever known. He was tracking a buck, a big one, its trail marked by deep, confident prints in the soft earth near a creek bed. The late afternoon sun slanted through the canopy, painting the forest floor in stripes of gold and shadow. That's when he heard it. It wasn't the cry of a hawk or the rustle of a coyote. It was a human sound, a weak, guttural whimper that was almost stolen by the wind. Crew froze his hand instinctively, resting on the worn leather grip of his colt. Trouble had a way of finding you in the territories, even when you weren't looking for it. He tethered Rebel to a low-hanging branch, the horse nickering softly in protest, and moved forward on foot, his worn boots making no sound on the pine needles. He followed the sound to a small, sun-dappled clearing, and there, lying at the base of a lichen-covered boulder, was its source. A woman. A native woman dressed in buckskin leggings and a tunic adorned with intricate quill work. Her face was pale beneath its natural copper tone, beaded with sweat, her lips cracked and bluish. One leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the buckskin torn to reveal a horrifying wound just below the knee. It was a deep, ragged gash, swollen, angry red, and streaked with the black lines of blood poisoning. Flies buzzed lazily around it. He could see the story plain as day. A fall from a horse, maybe, or a run-in with a spooked buffalo. The wound itself might not have been a death sentence, but the fever that now raged in her body surely was. Her breathing was a shallow, ragged affair, each intake of air a struggle. She was dying. Crew's first instinct was the one that had kept him alive for 35 hard years: turn around, walk away. This was not his fight. She was Lakota, he could tell by the style of her moccasins. Getting involved with the Lakota, especially here in the Paha Sapa, their most sacred land, was a fool's errand. The treaties were a joke, tensions with prospectors, and the army were at a razor's edge, and a lone white man, found with a dying Lakota girl, would be a dead white man. No questions asked. He took a step back. His cabin was 2 hours' ride north. He had salted meat, coffee, and blessed silence waiting for him. He could be there by nightfall, build a fire, and forget he ever saw this. But as he turned, she made another sound. A single word whispered in her own tongue. A name, perhaps. It wasn't a cry of pain, but of profound loss. It was the same sound his own mother had made after they got the news about his brother at Antietam. A sound of a soul untethering itself from the world. Damnation, Crew swore under his breath the word, a harsh scrape in the quiet woods. He was no doctor, but he'd been a soldier. He'd seen more wounds than he could count, had held the hands of boys as the light left their eyes from fevers just like this. He knew the signs. He also knew what to do if there was any chance at all. He knelt beside her. Her skin was scorching to the touch. He gently pushed aside the dark, sweat-matted hair from her face. She was young, barely out of her teens, with high cheekbones and a strong jawline that even in her current state held a defiant beauty. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, clouded with delirium, and in them he saw not fear, but a weary resignation. He couldn't leave her. The ghost of every man he'd failed to save on the battlefield rose up in his memory. Maybe, just maybe, he could save this one. "All right, girl," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Let's see what we can do." His mind, long accustomed to the rhythms of survival, kicked into gear. He needed water, clean cloth, and something to fight the poison. He unslung his canteen and gently dribbled a little water onto her cracked lips. She swallowed reflexively. Next, the wound. It was festering badly. He took out his Bowie knife, its blade honed to a razor's edge. He'd need to clean it, cut away the dead tissue. It would be agony for her if she were fully conscious. Maybe the delirium was a mercy. He built a small fire, holding the blade in the flames until it glowed cherry red, sterilizing it. While it cooled, he searched the area around the creek bed. His grandmother, a woman who trusted herbs more than doctors, had taught him a few things. He found a patch of yarrow, its feathery leaves unmistakable. He crushed the leaves and flowers into a dark green pulp, a natural antiseptic and blood-clotting agent. Returning to her side, he took a deep breath. "This is gonna hurt," he said softly. With grim determination, he cut away the tattered buckskin and began to debride the wound, his hand surprisingly steady. The woman's body arched in a silent scream, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Crew worked quickly, his face a mask of concentration, his jaw tight. He cleaned the gash as best he could with water from his canteen, packed it with the yarrow poultice, and then tore strips from his own spare shirt to bind it tightly. She needed to be moved. Leaving her here was not an option. A predator would find her before morning. His cabin was the only chance she had. Getting her onto Rebel was a feat of strength and will. She was dead weight, her body limp, occasionally racked with violent shivers. He managed to heave her over the saddle, her body slumped forward and mounted behind her. His arm wrapped securely around her waist to hold her in place. The ride back was a slow, agonizing journey. Every jolt of the horse drew a pained gasp from her. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the hills into a deep, star-lit indigo. The warmth of her fever-ridden body soaked through his shirt, a constant, worrying reminder of the race he was running against death. He finally reached his cabin, a small, sturdy structure he'd built himself nestled in a hidden valley. He carried her inside and laid her gently on his own cot, the only piece of soft furniture in the Spartan room. He lit a lantern, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. For the next 3 days, the world shrank to the size of that room. He forced broth and willow bark tea, a fever reducer, between her lips. He changed the dressing on her leg, fighting back the smell of infection, cleaning the wound with whiskey when his yarrow ran out. He sat through the long nights, listening to her delirious ramblings in a language he didn't understand, bathing her forehead with cool cloths. He saw the fever break on the 3rd night. The violent shivering subsided, and her temperature finally began to drop. The angry red around the wound began to recede, replaced by the pale pink of healing flesh. On the morning of the 4th day, he was sitting by the fire, cleaning his rifle, when he heard a noise from the cot. He looked over. She was awake. Her dark, intelligent eyes were clear for the first time, and they were fixed on him. They held no gratitude, only a deep, profound, and unnerving watchfulness. There was fear there, yes, but it was buried beneath a layer of steel. "Water," she whispered, her voice raspy. He brought it to her in a tin cup, helping her sit up. She drank greedily, never taking her eyes off him. "Who are you?" she asked, her English careful and accented. "Crew Ellington." Why she asked a single word that held 1,000 questions. Why help me? Why bring me here? What do you want? Before he could answer, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from outside. Not one horse, but many. They were fast, and they were close. Crew's blood ran cold. He grabbed his Colt, his body tensing for a fight. He moved to the window and peered through a crack in the shutter. A dozen Lakota warriors, their faces painted for war, were surrounding his cabin. They were armed with rifles and bows, their expressions grim and hostile. At their lead was a tall, powerfully built warrior with a hawk-like nose and eyes that burned with cold fire. His gaze met Crew's through the crack in the wood, and in that moment, Crew Ellington knew that his act of mercy had just plunged him into a world of trouble far deeper than any battlefield he had ever known. The silence outside the cabin was heavier than a tombstone. It was the silence of judgment, of coiled violence, waiting to be unleashed. Crew could feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on his small, vulnerable home. He was a good shot, but he wasn't a fool. 1 man against 12 was a short, bloody equation that always ended the same way. "They are from my village," the woman said from the cot. Her voice was stronger now, laced with an urgency that cut through her weakness. "They will not ask questions." Crew knew she was right. He looked from the warriors outside to the woman on his bed. Her dark eyes pleaded with him not for her own life, but for his. In a flash, he saw the absurdity of it. He'd saved her from death only to have her people deliver it to him. "Stay inside," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't make a sound." He unbolted the heavy plank door and stepped outside. His hands held up palms open and empty. His Colt was still tucked in its holster, a dangerous comfort. He knew better than to make a move for it. The lead warrior dismounted, his movements fluid and predatory. He was even more intimidating up close. Scars traced patterns on his bare chest, and an eagle feather was tied in his long black hair. This was Chaitin, a name that meant falcon in the Lakota tongue, and his eyes lived up to the name, sharp, merciless, and missing nothing. "Where is she?" Chaitin's voice was like rocks grinding together. He spoke in English, a clear challenge. "She's safe," Crew replied, keeping his own voice even. "She was hurt. I brought her here to tend a wound." Chaitin's lips curled into a sneer. "The white man speaks of healing, while his people bring only sickness and death. You will take us to her. Now." It was not a request. Crew stood his ground. "She's weak. The fever just broke. Barging in there isn't going to help." Chaitin took a step closer, his hand dropping to the hilt of a knife at his belt. The other warriors fanned out their rifles, now aimed squarely at Crew's chest. The air crackled with imminent violence. "You are in no position to tell us what will help Wasichu." He spat the Lakota word for the white man, making it sound like a curse. Suddenly, the cabin door creaked open. The woman stood there, leaning heavily against the doorframe, wrapped in one of Crew's spare blankets. Her face was pale and drawn, but her back was straight, her chin held high. "Chaitan, no," she called out. Her voice, though weak, carried the unmistakable ring of authority. The warrior's furious expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of shock and relief. Wiyaka, he breathed her name. He rushed to her side, his anger melting away into concern. "You are alive. I am alive because of him," Wiyaka said, gesturing with her head toward Crew. "I fell. My horse threw me near the rocks. My leg was broken to the bone, the poison was in my blood. I was waiting for the spirits. This man. He found me. He cleaned the wound. He fought the fever. He did not harm me." Chaitan looked from her to Crew, his eyes filled with suspicion and disbelief. He couldn't reconcile the image of a white man as a savior. To him, they were prospectors who defiled their sacred lands, soldiers who butchered their people, and government men who spoke with forked tongues. Crew Ellington, with his haunted blue eyes and calm demeanor, didn't fit the mold which only made him more dangerous. "We are taking you home," Chaitan declared, ignoring Crew completely. He signaled to two of his warriors, who moved forward to help Wiyaka. They fashioned a travois, a simple sledge made of two long poles to carry her gently. Crew watched his arms crossed over his chest as they prepared for the journey. He expected them to leave him there, to let him fade back into the solitude he'd chosen. He was wrong. "You will come too," Chaitan said, his glare returning. "My father, Chief Mato Najing, will want to see the man who found his daughter." Again, it was not a request. They took his colt and his rifle and gave him Rebel to ride. Surrounded by the Lakota warriors, Crew Ellington, the man who wanted nothing more than to be left alone, was escorted deep into the heart of the very land he'd tried so hard to be invisible in. The journey to the Lakota village took the better part of a day. It was a large, sprawling encampment in a wide, protected valley with dozens of teepees painted with symbols of family history and spiritual visions. The air smelled of wood smoke, roasting meat, and horses. As they rode in, the entire village seemed to stop and stare. The return of the search party with the chief's daughter was a cause for celebration, but the presence of a white man in their midst turned it into a spectacle of suspicion and curiosity. Wiyaka was taken immediately to a large, decorated teepee at the center of the camp, the home of her father, Chief Standing Bear. Crew was left under guard, standing awkwardly beside his horse, as children pointed and whispered, and elders watched him with impassive, knowing eyes. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Finally, a warrior came and motioned for him to follow. He was led to the chief's teepee. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sioux and sweetgrass. A fire burned in the central pit, its light dancing on the painted hides that lined the teepee. Wiyaka was lying on a soft bed of buffalo robes, being tended to by an old man with a face like a wrinkled map and eyes that seemed to look straight through flesh and bone. This was the medicine man, Kangi Sapa, or Black Crow. Seated opposite the entrance was the chief, Mato Najing. Standing Bear was a man who radiated quiet power. His face was weathered but noble, his long graying hair braided with otter fur. He did not look at Crew with the open hostility of Chaitan, but with an intense analytical scrutiny that was far more unnerving. Chaitan stood at his right side, his arms crossed, his hatred a palpable force in the teepee. The chief gestured for Crew to sit. For a long time, no one spoke. Kangisapa finished his examination of Wiaka's leg, nodding slowly. He murmured something to the chief in Lakota. Finally, Chief Standing Bear looked at Crew. His voice was deep and resonant, like the drumbeat of the earth itself. "You are Crew Ellington," he stated, not asked. "I am. My daughter tells me you saved her life. I gave her a chance. Her own strength did the rest." The chief considered this. Kangisapa has looked at the wound. He says the cuts were clean, made by a man who knows how to use a blade to save, not just to kill. He says the poultice was of yarrow, an old healing plant. He says you kept her warm and gave her water. These are the actions of a man with honor. Crew simply nodded, unsure where this was leading. Chaitan couldn't contain himself. "Father, he is a white man. He was on our sacred land. How do we know he did not cause her fall, only to bring her here to gain some advantage?" Wiaka from her bed answered him in a sharp Lakota phrase that made Chaitan flinch, as if struck. The chief raised a hand, silencing them both. He turned his gaze back to Crew, and his expression grew somber, heavy, with the weight of what was to come. "In our world, Crew Ellington, all things are connected. The sky to the earth, the hunter to the hunted, the living to the dead. Our spirits are threads in a great tapestry, woven by Wakan Tanka, the great mystery." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Kangisapa has not only tended to my daughter's body, but to her spirit. He has told me what happened. When you found her, her spirit was already leaving her. It had begun its journey to the stars. It was a journey she had accepted." Crew felt a chill creep up his spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. The chief continued, his voice dropping lower. "What you did, it was more than medicine for the flesh. By forcing her to live, by tying her back to this world, you have tied your spirit to hers. You have interfered with the great mystery. You have pulled her thread from its path and woven it into your own." Crew stared, uncomprehending. "Chief, I don't understand. I just did what anyone would have done." "No," the chief said, his eyes locking onto Crew's. "Not anyone. You did it. And now a debt exists, not a debt of gratitude that can be paid with horses or rifles. It is a spiritual debt. Her spirit, called back from its journey, is now tethered to yours. It cannot be left to drift unattached. To do so would be to curse her, to leave her haunted and incomplete for the rest of her days. It would bring misfortune to our people." A terrible, impossible understanding began to dawn on Crew. This was worse than he could have ever imagined. There is only one way to honor this bond, the chief declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. There is only one way to balance the scales of the spirit world. He looked from Crew to his daughter Wiaka, whose eyes were now wide with a mixture of shock and apprehension. "By the traditions of our ancestors and the laws that govern the spirits, the life you saved now belongs to you. Wiaka must be your wife." The words hung in the air, more shocking than a gunshot. Chaitan let out a strangled cry of rage. Crew could only stare, his mind reeling the silence of his solitary world, shattered by the declaration that had just bound him body and soul to a stranger and her tribe. He was no longer a lone man. He was a groom. The fire in the center of the teepee crackled spitting sparks into the sudden, suffocating silence. Crew felt as if the air had been punched from his lungs. Wife. The word was so foreign, so disconnected from the life he had meticulously built, that it barely registered. He looked at Wiaka, who quickly dropped her gaze to the buffalo robe covering her, her face an unreadable mask. He looked at Chaitan, whose face was a thundercloud of pure murderous fury. And he looked at the chief, whose expression was as implacable as the mountains outside. No crew said the word, coming out as a croak. He cleared his throat and tried again, his voice firm. "No. With all due respect, Chief, that's impossible." "Impossible." Standing Bear's eyebrows rose slightly. "You saved her from death. This is the consequence. It is our way." "Your way is not my way," Crew countered, standing up. He felt cornered, trapped. "I ask for no payment. I want no reward. All I want is my horse and my gear, and to be on my way. Your daughter is safe. That's all that matters." "You think this is a reward?" Chaitan stepped forward, his hand clenching and unclenching. "To give a daughter of the Lakota, a woman of her standing, to a rootless Wasichu. It is not a reward. It is a desecration. But the law is the law." The last words were spoken through gritted teeth, a bitter acknowledgement of a tradition he despised but could not defy. The law of the spirit is not a thing you can ride away from. "Crew Ellington," the chief said calmly. "It is not a treaty to be broken. It is the foundation of the world. To refuse this union is to insult the great mystery. It would bring shame to my daughter and bad medicine upon my people. You would be declaring that the life you saved has no value. We cannot allow this." Crew's mind raced. This was a nightmare. He had fled the bonds of civilization, the expectations and entanglements of society, only to find himself ensnared in a far more ancient and inescapable web. He was a prisoner not of war, but of tradition. "So I have no choice?" he asked, his voice cold. "The choice was made when you decided not to leave her to die in the forest," Standing Bear replied. "Now you must honor it." The meeting was over. Crew was escorted not to a teepee of his own, but to a smaller one placed conspicuously near the center of the camp. It was comfortable enough with furs and a fire pit, but he understood its true nature. It was a gilded cage. A guard was posted outside his flap day and night. His weapons were not returned. He was a guest, a future son-in-law to the chief, and a prisoner all at once. The days that followed were a torment of surreal dislocation. He was an alien on display. The villagers treated him with a mixture of awe, suspicion, and outright hostility. The children would dare each other to run past his teepee. The women would fall silent and turn away as he passed. The warriors' friends of Chaitan would watch him with open contempt, sometimes bumping into him accidentally or muttering insults just loud enough for him to hear. His only regular contact was with Wiyaka. As her leg healed, she began to visit him, bringing him food and tending to the small fire in his teepee. Their first few encounters were painfully awkward. She was bound by her father's decree, he by their refusal to let him leave. They were two strangers, forced into the most intimate of contracts by forces neither of them controlled. She would sit on one side of the fire, he on the other. The silence between them a living thing. She was still weak, but with each passing day, her strength returned, and with it a quiet resilience that fascinated him. He learned her name meant feather in his tongue, a name that seemed at odds with the iron will he saw in her eyes. "You should not have saved me," she said, one evening, her voice barely a whisper. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation beyond simple necessities. Crew looked up from the piece of wood he was aimlessly whittling with a borrowed knife. A person's supposed to help someone who's dying. My spirit was at peace, she said, her gaze distant, fixed on the flames. I was ready to walk the star road. Now, I am here. And you are here. Trapped. I'm not the only one. Then he said quietly. She shook her head. I am Lakota. I must obey the wisdom of my father and the shaman. You are from another world. You value freedom above all else. I have seen it in your eyes since the moment I awoke in your cabin. They are the eyes of a wolf that longs for the horizon. He was stunned by her perception. She saw him more clearly than anyone had in years. As the days turned into weeks, their conversations deepened. He learned of her life of the buffalo hunts, of the stories of the Star People, and the trickster Iktomi. She spoke of her mother, who had died years before, and the pressure she felt as the chief's only child. In turn, and to his own surprise, he began to speak of his past. He told her about his farm in Georgia, the smell of the peach blossoms in spring, the red clay soil. He spoke of the war, not of the battles and the killing, but of the quiet, agonizing moments in between, the loss, the disillusionment, the hollowing out of his soul that had sent him fleeing west. He found himself telling her things he hadn't even admitted to himself. He learned she was fiercely intelligent, with a dry wit that occasionally broke through her reserved exterior. She began to teach him words in her language, laughing softly at his clumsy pronunciations. He saw the woman behind the tradition, the person behind the chief's daughter. He saw her strength, her grace, and a deep well of kindness. And he realized with a sense of growing panic that the cage was starting to feel less like a prison. The one constant source of friction was Chaitan. The warrior saw Crew not just as a rival, but as a living symbol of his people's decline. He had been Wayaka's intended since they were children, an arrangement understood by everyone. Crew's arrival had shattered that future. Chaitan took every opportunity to humiliate him. He challenged Crew to a shooting contest, assuming the white man's rifle skills wouldn't translate to the bow. Crew, who had learned to hunt with a bow as a boy, held his own, his arrows thudding into the target with quiet consistency. He didn't win, but he didn't lose, which was perhaps even more infuriating for Chaitan. He challenged him to a horse race across the plains. Chaitan rode a magnificent, fiery war pony. Crew rode Rebel, his older, calmer steed. Chaitan bolted into the lead, his laughter carrying on the wind. But Crew knew his horse. He paced Rebel, conserving his energy, taking a longer, less obvious route through a series of ravines. He emerged ahead of the exhausted Chaitan, just before the finish line, winning by a nose. The victory earned him a few nods of grudging respect from the other warriors, but it cemented Chaitan's hatred into something dark and dangerous. The tension was becoming a sickness in the village. Crew knew it couldn't last. Something had to break. The breaking point arrived with a new presence. One afternoon, 2 riders approached the camp. They weren't Lakota. They were white men, dressed in dusty but expensive-looking town clothes. The leader was a portly man with a florid face and small, greedy eyes that darted everywhere, assessing, calculating. His name was Silas Blackwood, a name whispered in the trading posts and frontier towns, always in connection with shady land deals and broken treaties. He called himself a government agent, but everyone knew he worked for the railroad or the mining companies or whoever paid him the most. He had come, he announced to the chief, to make a new offer for the land, a generous one, promising supplies and protection on a reservation far to the south. It was the same old song of lies and dispossession. Standing Bear refused him politely but firmly. The Black Hills were not for sale. As Blackwood was leaving the chief's teepee, his eyes fell on Crew, who was standing near his own teepee. A slow, cunning smile spread across Blackwood's face. He saw a white man living among the Lakota, and his greedy mind immediately saw an opportunity. That evening, as dusk settled, Crew saw a figure slip away from the camp and ride out to the low hills where Blackwood had made his camp. Even from a distance, he recognized the broad shoulders and proud carriage. It was Chayton. A cold dread settled in Crew's stomach. A jealous warrior, a crooked land agent, and a sacred, contested piece of land. It was a recipe for disaster. The drama of his unwilling engagement was about to be dwarfed by a betrayal that could destroy them all. The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky, offering little light. Crew stood in the shadow of his teepee, watching the spot where Chayton had disappeared over the rise. A cold knot of certainty tightened in his gut. No warrior of Chayton's standing would meet a man like Silas Blackwood in secret unless treachery was afoot. He knew he couldn't stay put. This went beyond his own strange predicament. This threatened the entire village. It threatened Weaka and her father. For the first time since arriving, his desire to escape was replaced by a powerful, unwelcome sense of responsibility. He had to know what was said. Slipping out of the camp was easier than he expected. The guard at his teepee was more ceremonial now, his vigilance dulled by routine. Crew moved with the quiet stealth he'd learned in the war, a ghost in the long shadows. He kept to the gullies and creek beds, making his way toward the low glow of a campfire on a distant hill. Blackwood's camp was small, just him and his single hired gun, a wiry man with dead eyes named Cletus. Crew crept close, hiding himself in a thicket of choke cherry bushes, downwind from their fire. The smell of cheap whiskey and frying bacon hung in the air. Chayton was there, squatting by the fire, his face grim. "They will not listen," Chayton was saying, his voice low and bitter. "The old man is stuck in the past. He speaks of spirits and sacred ground, while our children grow thin and the buffalo vanish. He would rather his people starve with honor than live with progress." Silas Blackwood took a long pull from a flask, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. His little eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. "Honor doesn't fill a man's belly, does it, son? Or put a new rifle in his hands?" He nodded toward a brand-new Winchester rifle leaning against a saddlebag. "That's a beauty, ain't it? I've got 20 more just like it." Chayton's gaze lingered on the rifle. It was a weapon far superior to the old single-shot Springfields and bows his warriors carried. "What do you want?" Chayton asked, his voice rough. "I want what's best for everyone," Blackwood said with a greasy smile. "I want to avoid bloodshed. I want your people to have a future, and I want the gold that's gathering dust under this valley. All it takes is a signature from the chief on a piece of paper. He will not sign. Not standing. Bear." No, Blackwood agreed smoothly. "He's a relic. But leadership changes. A tribe needs a strong leader, a man of vision, a man who isn't afraid to make hard choices for the good of his people. A man like you." Crew felt his blood run cold. Blackwood was playing Chayton like a fiddle, stroking his ego, feeding his ambition and resentment. "And what of the white man in your camp?" Blackwood's tone shifted, becoming conspiratorial. "The one they call Ellington. Odd, isn't it? a white man set to marry the chief's daughter. Some might say he has the old man's ear now. Some might say he's the one whispering to hold on to the past because it gives him power. Chaitan's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing in anger. He is a curse on my people. Exactly. Blackwood leaned forward. So here's my proposition. You help me, and I help you. The current chief is an obstacle. The white man is an obstacle. If they were to meet with an unfortunate accident, who would the tribe turn to? The great warrior Chaitan, that's who. You would be chief. You would sign the treaty, your people would get their supplies and their new reservation, and I get my valley. And the woman, Wiyaka, would be yours, free from this ridiculous spirit law. The raw, naked evil of the plan hung in the air. Blackwood was offering Chaitan everything he'd ever wanted, wrapped in a package of murder and betrayal. From his hiding place, Crew watched Chaitan's face, saw the war happening in his eyes. He saw the flicker of honor fighting against the poison of jealousy and ambition. For a moment he thought he hoped Chaitan would refuse. But then Chaitan's gaze fell once more on the Winchester, and his expression hardened. "What would you need me to do?" he asked. Crew had heard enough. He backed away as silently as he had come, his heart pounding with a cold fury. This was no longer about him. This was about stopping a massacre. He went straight to Wiyaka's teepee. It was late, and he knew it was a breach of every protocol, but he didn't care. He brushed past the startled guard, an old man who was more of a chaperone, and entered. Wiyaka was asleep. He gently shook her shoulder. "Wiyaka, wake up." She awoke with a start, her hand flying to a small knife she kept by her furs. When she saw it was him, her fear turned to confusion and anger. "What are you doing? You cannot be here." "There's no time," he said in a low, urgent whisper. "Chaitan is betraying you. He's with the prospector Blackwood. They're planning to kill your father. They're planning to kill me. Chaitan will take over, sign away your land, and Blackwood will give him rifles and power." She stared at him, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. Disbelief, loyalty to her own people, and a dawning horror. "No," she whispered. "Chaitan is proud. He is angry. But he would not. He would not betray our father." I heard it with my own ears. Crew insisted. "He's blinded by hate for me, and what he thinks I've taken from him. Blackwood is using him." He could see the struggle in her eyes. To believe him was to accept a terrible truth about someone she had known her entire life. To disbelieve him could mean the death of her father and the end of their way of life. "Prove it," she said, her voice trembling but firm. He told Blackwood about the western approach to the valley, the one through the narrow canyon. He said it's the least guarded, especially at dawn. He's going to lead Blackwood's men through it himself in 2 days during the morning ceremonies. Wiyaka's face went pale. The western canyon was a little-known route used only by hunting parties. Its defense was based on secrecy, not strength. It was the camp's greatest vulnerability, a detail only a trusted member of the tribe would know. The last trace of doubt vanished from her eyes, replaced by old hard resolve that mirrored his own. The bond between them, once a matter of unwanted tradition, was now forged in a crucible of shared danger. They were no longer a captive and a reluctant bride. They were allies. "My father must be told," she said, her voice low and steely. She began to dress quickly. "Will he believe it?" Crew asked. "His word against Chaitan's." "He will believe us," she said, looking at him with an intensity that struck him to the core. They went together to Standing Bear's teepee, a white man and a Lakota woman, moving as one through the sleeping camp. They woke the chief, and as the fire was built up from embers, they laid out the terrible story. Crew recounted the conversation he had overheard, every venomous word. Wiaka stood by his side, her presence a silent, powerful endorsement of his testimony. She explained the significance of the Western Canyon route, the tactical detail that proved the betrayal was real. Standing Bear listened without interruption, his face impassive, but Crew could see the deep pain in his eyes. The betrayal of a son, for he had raised Chayton as his own after the boy's parents had died in a raid, was a wound deeper than any blade. When they had finished, the old chief sat in silence for a long time, the firelight playing on his weathered face. He looked at Crew, then at his daughter. He saw them standing together, united against a common foe. He saw the truth. Chayton has allowed a serpent into his heart. Standing Bear, said his voice, heavy with sorrow, and its venom now threatens to poison us all. He rose to his feet, his stooped shoulders straightening the wise elder, replaced by the decisive war chief. "We will not wait for the serpent to strike," he declared. "We will be ready. And you, Crew Ellington, you say you are a soldier. The time for words is over. Tomorrow you will show us." He ordered one of the guards to bring Crew's weapons. The man returned and laid the Colt Peacemaker and the Winchester rifle at Crew's feet. Picking them up, feeling their familiar weight in his hands, was like reclaiming a part of himself he thought was lost. But as he looked at Wiaka, her face illuminated by the firelight, her eyes filled with a new, terrifying trust in him, he knew he was no longer fighting for himself. He was fighting for them. The alliance was sealed. The trap was about to be set. The pre-dawn air was cold and thin with a heavy mist clinging to the valley floor. It was the hour of spirits, but today prayer was replaced with the quiet shuffle of warriors taking their positions. There would be no confrontation with Chayton. His betrayal had to be witnessed by all. They would let Blackwood's trap spring, only to find the prey was the hunter. Crew stood on a rocky ledge overlooking the narrow western canyon, his Winchester feeling like a natural extension of his arm. His soldier's eye for kill zones and crossfire had augmented the Lakota's innate skill, turning the winding path below into a perfect trap. Beside him, Wiaka stood armed with a bow, her leg now strong enough to hold her steady. Her face was a mask of cold resolve, her eyes fixed on the canyon's entrance, waiting to witness the fall of the man she had once called friend. As the sky bled from black to purple, they appeared a column of riders moving through the fog. At their head, Chayton guided Silas Blackwood and 20 hired guns into the heart of his own village. He was pointing toward the camp, likely describing how they would strike during the morning ceremony, a time of peace and vulnerability. The arrogance of the betrayer was laid bare. They were allowed to ride deep into the choke point, the high rock walls pressing in on them. When the last of Blackwood's men had entered the kill zone, Standing Bear, watching from across the canyon, dropped his hand. A single piercing war cry from the chief shattered the morning quiet, answered instantly by a chorus from every hidden warrior. For a heartbeat, Blackwood's men reined in their faces, flashing with confusion and fear. Then the world exploded. A volley of arrows rained down from the cliffs, a silent, deadly storm that sent men tumbling from their saddles. Before the screams faded, rifle fire erupted from the canyon's mouth, sealing the only escape. The narrow space became a maelstrom of panicked horses and dying men. Crew raised his Winchester sighted and fired, working the lever with deadly efficiency. The war he had fled had found him, but this time the cause was righteous and clear. Chaitan, frozen in the center of the ambush he had engineered, looked up at the cliffs. He saw the faces of his own people filled with contempt. He saw Standing Bear, his expression one of sorrowful judgment. Then his eyes met Wiaka's, and in her gaze he saw the full weight of his dishonor. In that instant, the serpent of jealousy in his heart died, leaving only the ashes of shame. "It's a trap! Fight, you cowards, fight!" Silas Blackwood shrieked, his face purple with rage, as he fired his pistol wildly at the cliffs. But Chaitan was no longer listening. With a roar of pure despair, a sound of a soul tearing itself apart, he spurred his horse not in retreat, but directly at Blackwood. "You," he screamed, his voice raw with anguish. "You did this to me." Startled Blackwood turned and fired. The bullet struck Chaitan high in the chest, knocking him from his horse. As the traitor fell, an arrow flew from the ledge, Wiaka's, and buried itself deep in Blackwood's shoulder. He shrieked, dropping his pistol. Crew's rifle cracked an instant later. The shot was true, and Silas Blackwood was thrown from his saddle, his greedy ambition extinguished in the Dakota dust. A ringing silence descended on the canyon, broken only by the groans of the wounded. The battle was over. Crew and Wiaka descended with the chief, their steps heavy amidst the carnage. They found Chaitan still breathing a pool of blood spreading beneath him. Standing Bear knelt beside the dying warrior, his face etched with a vast sadness. "Father," Chaitan choked blood on his lips. "Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive, my son." Standing Bear said softly, "You lost your path. May you find it on your next journey." Chaitan's gaze moved to find Wiaka. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. His eyes then flickered to the crew, the burning hatred gone, replaced by a weary final acceptance. It was an apology and a concession, all in one silent glance. With a final shuddering sigh, his spirit was released. The rising sun illuminated the grim victory. Crew stood over the man whose hatred had nearly destroyed them all, realizing that his own place here had been cemented not by a spiritual law, but by loyalty and blood. The battle was won, but the cost was immense, and the war for his own future was about to be decided. The sun rose, burning away the mist and the ghosts of the battle. The grim work of the morning gave way to a tense, watchful quiet in the village. Chaitan was mourned as a warrior who had lost his path, but found a shred of honor at the end, while the bodies of Blackwood's men were removed, a stain cleansed from the sacred land. Through it all, Crew felt a profound sense of dislocation. The open hostility was gone, replaced by nods of respect. Yet he had never felt more like an outsider. He had fought and bled for these people, but he was not one of them. That evening, Standing Bear summoned him to his teepee. Wiaka was already there, seated beside her father. Her eyes, shadowed with grief, held a new depth as she looked at him, a silent acknowledgement of the crucible they had endured together. Crew Ellington, the chief, began, his voice weary but firm. "You came to us bound by a spiritual law you did not understand. Today you honored that bond not with obedience, but with loyalty and blood. The debt is paid. The scales of the spirit world are balanced." The chief paused, his gaze unwavering. "The obligation is fulfilled. You are a free man. We will give you provisions and your pick of the rifles taken today. You are free to leave, and no one will stop you. Freedom. It was the word he had once craved more than anything. The path back to his solitary cabin, to the quiet woods and the lonely sunsets, was now open. He could take it and disappear, leaving this world of complex traditions and sudden violence behind forever. He imagined his small cabin, the empty silence, the life he had built to keep everyone out. And for the first time, the image felt hollow, a shelter, but not a home. It was a life of running from the past, not building a future. His gaze shifted to Wiaka. He saw not a chief's daughter or a cultural requirement, but the woman who had listened to his broken history, who had seen the lonely wolf in his eyes, and had not turned away. He saw her courage on the cliff edge, a steady flame in the chaos. He realized with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating that leaving would not be a release. It would be an amputation. He had a choice, one free from law or spirits. His own choice. Slowly, Crew shook his head. "Chief, I thank you for your offer," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "But I no longer wish to accept it." He then turned, facing Wiaka, directly speaking to her alone. Wiaka, he began her name, feeling right on his tongue. "The laws say I am free. But I'm asking if you would have me stay, not because of a debt or a tradition, because my cabin is just wood and stone. My home. I think my home is wherever you are." A slow, brilliant smile spread across Wiaka's face, a sunrise chasing away the last shadows of grief. It was an expression of pure, unburdened joy that took his breath away. "Crew Ellington," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I have been waiting for you to choose. Not the spirits. You." She looked at her father, her decision clear. "I choose him, Father, not by law, but by my heart." Standing Bear nodded a deep satisfaction on his weathered face. A union born of choice is stronger than any born of law. It is good. Their wedding was not a solemn fulfillment of a contract, but a joyous celebration under the wide Dakota sky. As Crew stood beside Wiaka, her hand in his, he no longer felt like a prisoner or an outsider. He was a man who, after a lifetime of running, had finally found his way home. Their future would be fraught with the challenges of a changing world, but they would face it together, a union of two people, two worlds, and a love forged in fire and choice. And so the story of Crew Ellington and Wiaka doesn't end with a ride into the sunset, but with a sunrise on a new shared life. Theirs is a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery aren't found in the heat of battle, but in the quiet courage to open your heart to a world you don't understand. Their love story was written not in the stars, but carved into the very heart of the American West. A reminder that even in a time of conflict and division, two souls can find a common ground and build a home. What do you think? Was Crew right to stay? Or should he have taken his freedom and returned to his old life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this tale of the Old West, please give this video a like and be sure to share it with someone who loves a great story. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the dramatic heart of history. Thanks for listening.